You are listening to Cinema Rex. It's an Iranian film podcast. Episode 35, Mohsen Makhmalbaf's Salam Cinema, or Hello Cinema. And hello, Farhan.
Hi. You sound like you're on like NPR or something.
I was just about to say that. Hello, Farhan. Welcome to Cinema Rex podcast. Today we're discussing the revolutionary filmmaker, Mohsen Makhmalbaf.
I don't even know if your mic is going to be able to pick up your voice. You're speaking so quietly. Why do they do that on like NPR and a bunch of these like fancy podcasts?
I think their vibes are to be completely just relaxing, kind of like really introspective, soulful, like contemplative.
I think it's just putting people to sleep.
Yeah, I think that's the point. How's your week been?
Week was good. The Shorts episode was a little bit of a production for post.
Yeah.
Like having to pull bits and pieces from 4 films, even if they're shorts. And then we had the Jasmine interview. We had the Ariane interview. We had an issue with your mic, obviously, at one point. So just like trying to resolve for all of that, it was just a little more than normal.
Well, you did a fantastic job while I was in LA, having what was supposed to be known as a vacation. But when you take 2 kids.
Yeah,
I've never been more tired in my life.
Do you feel like you succeeded as a parent? Were your kids happy? Did they cry?
Yes, because my daughter met Elsa, and I have never seen her be so celebrity starstruck. She got in line, met Elsa, talked to her for a few seconds. We got a photo of it. And then afterwards, we left. She didn't want to leave the outside of the line, so she kind of just stood there and just watched her in awe for the next 30 minutes.
Okay, I have a question. Does she know that is just an actor, or is she like, no, that's Elsa?
I think she thinks that's Elsa.
So she thinks that that's the real Elsa, and the one in the Pixar movies is an animation, is not real. But this is the real Elsa that the movie's based on.
No, I think she thinks that when she's in the movie, she's in animation form. And then outside in the real world, she looks like this.
Interesting.
Is what I think.
Okay. You should ask her.
I can't ask her without breaking the dream.
You could ask her.
Do you think that's the real Elsa?
Not like that. Be like, why do you think Elsa looks different in the movie than when we met her? And then see how she makes sense of it.
But don't you think that'd be like a little like rude? Not rude, but I mean durud. Bar Shoma Dostana Aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast, where we discuss all things Iranian film, cinema, Disneyland, princesses, LA. What else we discuss? Auditions. I am Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
Farhan, why don't you just introduce the film we're talking about today?
Today we are reviewing our first Mohsen Makhmalbaf film.
But our second Makhmalbaf film.
Technically our second Makhmalbaf film, because our first was Samira Makhmalbaf's film Blackboards. This one is Mohsen Makhmalbaf's 1995 cinematic masterpiece, Salam Cinema, or in English,
Hello Cinema.
Hi.
I'll do a plot. I will do a plot summary.
Sure.
In this blend of documentary and fiction, a mob scene breaks out in an open casting call, and director Mohsen Makhmalbaf opts to make a film composed of the aspiring actors' auditions, while never revealing where reality ends and the script begins. A well-known Iranian director, Mohsen Makhmalbaf, plans to make a film for the celebration of the 100th anniversary of cinema. He placed an advertisement in a newspaper in order to hire 100 actors. He has prepared 1,000 application forms, but 5,000 people show up. The result is a riot in which the applicants are trampled on and wounded. Mohsen Makhmalbaf auditions dozens of men and women in front of the camera. Their statements reveal the reality of life in Iran. Makhmalbaf's film exhibits a strange series of interactions with would-be stars, including a young hopeful who tries to stand up by pretending to be a blind man, and a Paul Newman lookalike who admits to never having seen Paul Newman.
I just looked up what Paul Newman looks like young, and he does kind of look like it.
It has a Rotten Tomato score of no Rotten Tomato score because it only has one official reviewer, but it has an audience score of 87%.
Kaveh, what is
so
this? Wait, I want to ask you, before we get into our initial thoughts and prayers, what does this movie mean to you?
You have to expand on that question.
What does cinema mean to you? Why do you love cinema?
I love cinema because it is an art form that entertains but also reveals truths about human psyche and human emotion in a way that I feel other art forms can't as profoundly and eloquently reveal.
Nice. Well put.
What about you? What do you think about cinema?
I think for me, it's the escapism of cinema. It's how cinema can create a world where you can get immersed in, and often it's a world that you don't really know much about. And I think it's exciting when you're being immersed in that world where you don't know anything about, because now you're like, oh, this is new. I get to learn the rules of engagement here. Who are the people? What's the style? What's the decorum here? Like, I like learning about these intricacies of this aspect of life or an industry or place that I don't know much about.
Mm-hmm. That was Farhan's introspective corner, where he poses thought-provoking introspective thoughts.
Well,
questions.
I can't take credit for that question, because that question does come from the movie.
That's true. I shouldn't bury the lead and tell you, having seen this film for my first time, and I want your reaction. I didn't like it.
You didn't like it?
I almost despised it.
You're so full of shit. You're such a liar.
And I'm happy to see when you wrote in the comments about how excited you were about this film, and I deliberately held back my truths because I wanted to have this discussion with you. I'm glad to see
you're
how much
trolling me. This is not you're lying, Kabe.
I'm not.
You're lying. You're a liar. This isn't true.
But yeah, I'm interested in what you because I guess you mentioned earlier in this conversation that you had thought I'd seen this film before, which I had not.
Right, yeah.
So you might be confusing it with Afra, maybe.
Well, no, because when we first came up with our list for the podcast, this was one of the movies that you had said, oh, put that on the list, like 2.5 years ago.
I don't think I did. I don't even remember even knowing about this movie.
Could have sworn you did.
My Makhmalbaf knowledge is very limited.
Maybe you just said Makhmalbaf, and then I went through and I put a bunch of his like prominent films.
That might have been more. I know I've only seen a handful of his films. This I'd never even seen.
Right. Okay.
And it didn't register.
I do kind of wish we had started with one of his earlier films that was just like kind of just like a straight film, because I feel like it would have given more context for this one.
Possibly. I think one of the things that I struggle with is in the pantheon of greatest Iranian filmmakers, he's up there for sure. He's obviously one of the main subject matters. He's the subject matter of Close Up. And he's one of the names that anglicized filmmakers will butcher when they list the greatest. They'll be like Kiarostami, Makhmalbaf. They'll like list his name in Panahi, right? And like sort of like I do with a bunch of names I say. But, he's in there in the pantheon. If there was a Mount Rushmore of Iranian filmmakers, Kiarostami certainly would be there. Beizai, I would argue, should be there. Makhmalbaf would probably be there too.
Especially if you're talking about pantheon of Iranian filmmakers recognized in the West.
Right.
Because we do often get comments on our social media platforms and DMs and stuff where people are like, a lot of the films that you're reviewing are by filmmakers who are more popular in the West.
Yeah.
And not necessarily as popular in Iran.
Yeah.
And part of that is because, our retrospective insight into Iran is partially through our families, but also through the environment around us, right?
Yeah. But Makhmalbaf was popular in Iran.
No, he was, for sure.
One of the things I thought I was a bit of an outlier for was his films never resonated for me the way Panay and Kiarostami and Farhadi and Beizai had in the past. One of the reasons is at least for long periods of his time, he was a deeply religious man. Very religious. And again, we'll get into behind the scenes trivia, but he was like almost like a Khomeini, like not even apologist, supporter to a certain extent. And he was criticized for it. For a long portion of his life, it's almost like having this filmmaker who's brilliant, but is also like a Trump supporter,
right?
Out there making films. It's just, it gave me a weird like thing. And I thought for the longest time I was alone in that until I realized, who else also agrees with me that isn't that much of a big fan of Makhmalbaf?
Can I guess?
Yeah.
Mertash?
Yeah.
I can see that.
And so I had a discussion with him. I was like, oh, I thought I was the only one. He said no. And I do love still a lot of his films. We'll get to them. He's made obviously masterpiece films, which we're going to tackle in the probably next couple of weeks. But there's been this, it just didn't resonate with me as much. But I really want to hear what your thoughts were about this film, because you clearly gushed over it and liked it and enjoyed it. And I wonder also if is it because you're a director that there's something that resonates with you? You could relate to Makhmalbaf? Yeah, just go ahead. The platform is yours.
I think for me, there's this genre that we've talked about before where you and I have kind of called it as a joke, like cinema vakai, right?
Yeah.
Which is like the Iranian rendition of like cinema verite. But I think the Iranian version of it is more than just an Iranian version of cinema verite, because it's like, it really blurs that line between what is real and what is not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The way that Kiarostami and Panahi and Makhmalbaf do it, it's well beyond just what cinema verite is. And this movie feels like the furthest extent that you can go with that without it essentially just becoming like a documentary.
Yeah.
And so the number one reason why I was so excited to talk to you about this is because I was interested to know what was real and what was not. Because there's so much while I was watching this movie that I was like, wait, is that real? Is that not? There's like layers to the fourth wall breaking in this film.
Yeah.
Which I find deeply fascinating.
Yeah, I find a lot of that interesting. Like kind of when there's a moment when he's talking about, well, you've auditioned and you've gotten the part. You're like, is he talking about the part in this film that you're watching, or is he talking about it for a subsequent film?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff where it's like, when the lines for reality stop and the story becomes about the fiction of some other film, that stuff was really cool and interesting. And I remember when I was first reading the premise, I was like, oh, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to go into a little bit of like festival cons right now because it helps us discuss this stuff.
Sure.
My biggest problem with it, and maybe this might have been also a mood thing that I was in, but I feel like, and this also might have to do with the fact that we just do this podcast a lot, but I think at times, or maybe as we're watching more of these films, my tolerance for Iranian men with big egos is like coming to a limit. And as I was watching the way Makhmalbaf would treat a lot of these people, I grew a distaste for his behavior in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And I also started thinking, I wrote down the note here, I reject the premise that this is about a celebration of cinema. This often felt at times to me like a man having a massive ego trip. And one thing I thought you might find interesting to discuss with me is, the other note I left for myself was, this feels like the feature-length version of that scene that Kiarostami wrote with the kid in the classroom.
I was thinking about that too.
For all the reasons that we didn't like it, and especially you. I think you found it more distasteful than I did.
No, I did.
And I was like, we're watching just a 75-minute version of that scene play out.
Yeah. And I felt the same watching this, to be fair.
Yeah, and it left a bitter taste in my mouth throughout the entire film, that despite the stuff that I found fascinating, I thought it was interesting. Mm-hmm. I couldn't help but think it's exploitative, cruel, and a little bit dishonest in what it's trying. Like, again, you know how often I talk about how important theme is? Mm-hmm. I don't know what the theme is. I have a theory about what the theme is, but if it is what I think they purport for it to be, I reject that they're actually doing that. This at times, is it not fair to say like this at times felt like a man with an ego trip?
No, absolutely. And I think that while this isn't necessarily a celebration of 100 years of film, I think that it's definitely a retrospective of the Iranian New Wave movement, specifically that cinema haqiqat. You know what I mean? Because this is a whole movie where you get to see on full display that style of filmmaking that Kiarostami and Makhmalbaf came to be known for, which a lot of Westerners view that and they go, wow, it's so beautiful, it's so novel, it's so interesting. But when you think about the actual people involved in the making of these films, you come to realize that it's pretty exploitative. It's emotionally manipulative. Yeah. It's not as clever as people think. It's just mean. You know what I mean? And so like, while I'm saying I love this film, I'm not okay with what he's doing, and I'm not okay with the practices that he's using. I love this film because we get to now see on full display that style of filmmaking.
So go expand on that, because that's interesting. Like, expand on that, seeing that style, and tell me more about your love for this film, because that's a perspective you're not going to hear much from me.
Yeah, I think just if for whatever reason you've just jumped into this episode and you missed the one on Where's the Friend's House, there's a scene in Where's the Friend's House where this kid is crying on camera and he's having a conversation with a teacher off screen. And what happened in reality to get that kid to cry, Kiarostami devised this plot with the set's photographer who's going around with a Polaroid camera taking photos of people. And one of these kids who grew up in a village had never had a photo of himself. And he was really excited to get a photo of himself. And Kiarostami said, everyone can have a photo except for you. You're the only one not allowed. And then he tells the set's photographer to go get a picture of the kid in secret. And he does it, and he gives the photo to the kid, and the kid is excited. He's cherishing this photo. He's hiding it. And then they start rolling. And just as they start rolling, Kiarostami goes, what are you hiding? What is that? Give it to me. Didn't I tell you can't have this? You can't have a photo of yourself. And he rips it up in front of the kid. And the kid just starts bawling and crying. And I had commented in an earlier episode that I thought that was traumatic and it was exploitative. And as we've done more and more films coming out of Iran, especially out of filmmakers inspired by the New Wave movement, we've talked about different anecdotes of filmmakers doing things like that to get performances out of their actors, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this movie, it's like just an hour and 10 minutes straight of Makhmalbaf doing this to character after character after character as they're auditioning to be in a movie. And he'll bring people in and he'll be like, cry right now or you're not a real actor, cry. And he just starts berating them until they cry. And then finally, when they cry, he doesn't even give them the satisfaction of like, okay, great, you've cried. He's like, you only cried because I'm a good director. You didn't cry because you're a good actor. If you're a good actor, you'll cry again right now without me saying anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can't. And I think that it's a really bad practice. I think it's in bad taste, but I think that it's very possible that this is even him commenting on that style of filmmaking. I don't know, right? Because this movie blends the line of fiction and reality so much that there's aspects of these things that we're critical about that he could very well be commenting on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I have to give the film credit. It certainly doesn't paint Makhmalbaf in a good light, which is obviously a choice Makhmalbaf made. Like, he knows how maybe he doesn't, I don't know. But like,
I think he does.
He definitely comes out in a certain way. And I had to give it credit to be like, well, you're not giving this a shine. You're not giving this like a polished version of the nice version of you. You're coming off like a pretty hideous person.
Yeah. And I want to comment on that when we get to deeper analysis, because there's two scenes in particular that I think lend to why I think he is conscious of it.
Great. We won't go through every group, but I will try to go in order, and you give me your comment and thoughts on some of them. And if I've skipped over any of the people, you can address it.
Sure. For audio listeners, Kaveh was stretching while he said that sentence.
Yes.
Also, I said audio listeners as if there's a video version. To be clear, there is no video version of this podcast.
I commented the opening footage looks like protest footage, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't you think so? The way everyone's just kind of like jamming and running through gates and stuff. I was just like, wow, that's kind of cool. Looks like protest footage. I certainly wish there was some deeper analysis there.
I like the setup in that scene because there's a guy on a megaphone who's trying to like corral the audience and the crowd. And it immediately tells you the setup for the film.
Yeah.
In the first like 2 seconds, there's a guy on a megaphone being like, everyone, can I have your attention? There's too many of you here. We only have 100 roles to cast in this film that is meant to be a celebration of the 100th year of cinema. Unfortunately, there's 2,000 of you. Please don't riot. Please don't trample each other. Blah, 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 blah. So immediately there's a guy on a megaphone telling you all, hey, this is the setup for the film.
Yeah, and it's kind of like for American version or something, it'd be like if Christopher Nolan or Spielberg had put out an ad saying, I want like an open audition for 100 spots for lead roles in my film. And then imagine thousands of people showing up to like audition. It's a chaotic scene.
Alternatively, going back to Christopher Nolan.
For our audio listeners, Farhan was farting in that moment in case you needed to know why it sounded like that.
I'm dying.
Go ahead.
It would be like if Christopher Nolan in the first scene of Batman Begins, if Bruce Wayne was like, hey, Alfred, I think I'm going to become Batman, a vigilante themed after a bat because I'm afraid of bats. And bad guys should be afraid of bats too. And then it goes on.
Farhan, can you give a different movie example? You've not mentioned Batman Begins.
You brought up Christopher Nolan.
I know, but he's made like other movies. You brought up Batman Begins.
It would be like if Steven Spielberg
in our last 3 podcast episodes.
Listen. It would be like if Steven Spielberg in the first 10 seconds of Jaws, the shark jumped up onto the boat and said, "Hey everybody, my name is Bruce. I'm a shark, and for the next few days, I'm going to be terrorizing this beach and eating people." Is that better?
The first guy that shows up claims to be blind. That guy was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He does the audition blind for a while with glasses, and he needs a guide to help him to center stage. But then Makhmalbaf recognizes that the guy is faking it.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy starts to cry, break down. He says, why have you come here? He's like, I just wanted to come here playing a performance to try to impress you. And I did it because I just love cinema so much. It means so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on the blind guy?
Yeah, I really like that scene. I found it kind of amusing that this guy pretended to be blind, not just during the audition, but he's like, yeah, I was pretending to be blind from Kerman all the way to Tehran.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like on the bus, in the street, like everywhere. And he's like, why? And he's like, because I wanted to play the part. I wanted to play the part of the blind guy. And Makhmalbaf is like, did you think that pretending to be blind would have garnered pity out of me to get this part? And he's like, no, I just wanted to prove to you that I am an actor. And I thought that if I could get the part while acting, that you would see how serious and how good of an actor I am. And then Makhmalbaf is kind of amused and he's impressed. And he's like, well, congratulations, you've made it into the film. And he's like, what do you mean? And then he's like, yeah, what if I told you that everything you just did is your part in the film? And this is it. That's it. You did it. Your part's over. And he's like, well, I guess I would go back to Kerman content that I've become an actor.
Yeah.
I thought that it was interesting. And that was the first scene where I was like, oh man, like this is what this movie is. It's like very much blurring the line between reality and not.
I was very much I was interested here. Look, I didn't start souring on the film until like the second half of the film. I was very much engaged.
Was it the scene with the sisters?
That was like the straw that broke the camel's back for me. And we'll get to the sisters, but I just started getting like increasingly more agitated with his behavior. Right. And it like towards the end, when you get to the sisters, I was really starting to lose my cool. Then there's a scene with women. I didn't really have any thoughts on that. I don't know. It's interesting how many of these people just love cinema, though. Like every one of them just is like, and I want to get into that, I guess, slightly with deeper analysis. But the love for Westernized cinema and Hollywood specifically was really interesting.
Mm. Yeah, even the singers who come up after the women.
Yeah,
some of them are singing American songs.
Yeah,
American songs from movies, pop songs, rock and roll, whatever. But then there's other people who are kind of mixed in that are singing Iranian folk songs in various languages from across the country.
Yeah. I liked seeing the men at play, which you don't see that often in cinema. Like when they were playing like improv games where he's also pretending to throw a fake grenade and all the men disperse, like exploding. Yeah. That stuff was really endearing and cute because you just, whenever do you see like Iranian men yes-anding you on stage with a performance? It's really cute. That was good.
And he just keeps like throwing prompts at them. He's like, now you're all in a shootout. And then they all like get on the one side and they're like, bang, bang, bang.
The idea of men at play was really fun there. Then one of the most interesting parts is the woman who shows up who says, I don't even want to be an actress. I want to do this audition to hopefully get into a film festival. Because this woman essentially lays it all out for Makhmalbaf by saying, if this film gets into a film festival, I get to go to the premiere at, say, Cannes. Or Cannes. I will say both now.
It's actually Cannes.
And I have a man who I'm in love with. His parents didn't allow us to marry. He's now out of the country. We can't see each other. But if I can escape Iran to attend a film festival, then I can be a refugee and leave this country. So what I thought was really interesting here is the woman doesn't even care about becoming a famous actress. She just wants to do this audition and nail the audition so that she can use it as her like escape, like almost like a prison escape.
Well, to get her visa, because she can't get a visa.
Yeah.
If a film gets into an international film festival, then she can get a visa.
Then my little screenwriter brain went off and like a light bulb moment. I was like, this is interesting. This is a really cool, compelling story. So much so that I thought this could have made for an entire premise of the film.
Yeah, I thought so too.
If everything had been the same and now we just stick with this woman, I was like, very cool.
Or even if she just like came to the other side of the desk with him for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And he was like, all right, you know what? From now on, you're going to play the part of my like casting director.
Yeah. Should I jump into behind the scenes trivia for this one moment, for this one woman, and then I don't have to do it later?
Sure.
So I read this was on IMDb. Makhmalbaf's two intertextual movies, Salam Cinema and Qabe, share both the theme of love and the female actor in an interesting fashion. One of the thousands of would-be actors who responded to the director's casting call in Salam Cinema is Shaghayer Jawdat, an attractive young woman who tells Makhmalbaf in the film that she has come for auditioning in the hopes of being cast in the director's movie, which she hopes will win awards from major foreign film festivals, causing them to invite her to travel abroad where she hopes to meet up with the boy she loves. Her confession of love for the boy and of what she's willing to do to obtain it was apparently so forthright that it caused the censors to erase some of her dialogue before releasing Salam Cinema. Hers was a convoluted and audacious plan to use love for cinema and for movie acting too. Hers was a convoluted but audacious plan to use love for cinema and for acting to find romance, an idea that, however far-fetched, initially largely materialized in the end. For Makhmalbaf did indeed cast Shaghayegh as the star in his next movie, Qabe, playing the part of Qabe, who is in love with a faraway young tribal man on horseback. And the film did indeed win international acclaim and awards, yet Shaghayegh did not travel abroad to reach her love, for apparently the man returned home, where according to Shaghayegh, everything turned out fine between them. So this actually played out in real life.
Oh, wow.
He cast her in his next movie as the lead, this one specific woman, and it played out exactly as she had hoped, except for that she didn't travel abroad and the man that she left came back.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. That's also very much blending, again, what you said, the blending of the reality and like the fiction of the situation.
Yeah.
And I think of all the women, I felt like this woman had actually the most stage presence. So I feel like this one was either a real actor or he discovered her during this audition. But don't you feel like she felt actory?
Yeah, she did. And I wonder if the general premise was real, but then going into the scene when they went to film it, they had a discussion of like, okay, here's how we're going to play it.
Yeah.
This is the setup. I'm going to push you like this. You respond vaguely like this. Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
And then they just improv the scene.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I think also this was the first time my alarm bells went off about this guy power tripping, because he kept sending her away. He's like, go then, leave my audition. Okay, come back. Do it again like this. And he's like, go, leave. And he did it like 2 or 3 times where he kept sending her away and calling her back. I'm like, okay, power trip.
But it did kind of feel like play between the two of them, because she maintained her power and she maintained her agency.
Yeah.
Yes, she was coming back, but she still kind of refused to play his fiddle a little bit.
Yeah.
You know? She gave him just as much as she wanted to give him.
Yeah.
If it was too much, he was like, no, I'm not giving you more than this. This is what it is what it is. And he also played to her fiddle a little bit too. Because she's like, I don't need to talk to you, but I need to speak to you in private.
Yeah.
I don't want other people to hear, whatever. And he's like, all right, fine. Everybody take a step back.
Yeah.
You can come over now and talk to me. And then she goes over and talks to him. So there was a little bit of like push and pull there, which was fun to see.
Did you notice one of the lighting guys is an actor from another movie we've reviewed?
Yes. Yeah. The grip. He's both. He's like the gaffer, the grip, and the dolly grip. He's the lead actor from The Wind Will Carry Us. Then
There's a scene where he's starting to ask the men to cry on command with various success. Then there's a scene I really enjoyed when when the men fail to cry. He's like, well, one of the men are like, why don't you ask your friend? He's an professionally trained actor who's been in your movie.
Yeah.
And they get this guy named Zainal
Zadeh, yeah.
And he shows up and he tells him to cry on command. And that man kills it. He does such a good job.
Yeah.
He like completely falls apart on command.
Yeah. And he's like, you want me to cry? You know yourself, Mohsen John, how many tears I've shed for cinema.
Yeah, beautiful.
You know my love for cinema, all this stuff. And then the end of the scene, right before the scene ends, Makhmalbaf is like, all right, Zainal, sorry, that wasn't good enough. You're cut from the film. And then the scene just ends.
And that was my second time alarm bells went for me, because I was so riveted by this guy's performance. So this was strike 2 for me of like, I wrote, this is in my notes. This is when I first wrote, this feels like the movie version of the teacher abusing students in Where's My Friend's House. Because I was so engrossed by that man's performance and I had so much like empathy for him.
Yeah.
And then he's like, no, that wasn't good enough. Get out of here. I'm like, you jerk. That's 2
but
times.
He's clearly in the movie. He's in the, it's not like it.
I know, but it just felt like, it felt so cruel.
It felt like he was like, because they've obviously collaborated multiple times, right? Like it feels like he's kind of busting his friend's chops a little bit there.
Yeah, maybe.
Like that's like something that you or I would do to each other,
right?
And I'm sure like because the scene immediately cuts. Like it's not like we see anymore. That's it. The scene is just like cut as soon as he's like, you're not in the movie. Yeah. It's just like over. So I'm sure if you played it another 5-10 seconds, he probably would have been like, I'm just joking. That was beautiful, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not like Zainal is like new to this either. Like he's worked with Makhmalbaf. He knows the deal. He's been watching all these auditions. And when he went up there, he didn't even need to manipulate him to get him to cry. He was just like, all right, you have 30 seconds to cry. Go. And he does it. He like straight up just like does it right there.
Yeah, that guy's a great performer. Okay, so then there's the guy who claims to be, people say I look like Paul Newman. And yeah, I made the note of like, he does kind of look like him. It's the high cheekbones that he has.
He does. Yeah. Also his eyes.
Then I found it really interesting, the brute looking guy. Do you remember the guy?
Yeah. It's funny when he was like, what kind of person do you think you look like? I was watching with my cousin. He's like, what kind of person do you think you look like? And before he answered, I was like, ghoul, which it's like a ghoul or a brute. And then he's like, usually a bad guy. And I was like, yeah, that works.
Yeah. I actually thought it was going to go the other way where he was going to say like handsome prince or something. Like, I thought that would have been the joke. But yeah, this guy genuinely looked like he would be perfect to play some mobster's like hitman. Like not even the mobster, but like the guy gets his hands dirty.
The muscle.
Yeah, the muscle.
Or like a henchman in a James Bond film.
Yeah, he was really good for that look. And it's actually a shame that he never did play like in the James Bond movie because he looked great like for that part.
Yeah, he has a great look.
Face, like genuinely terrifying.
My cousin was like, this guy looks like a Neanderthal.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting flashbacks to our Taste of Cherry episode where we just
we crapped on him.
Keep dunking on the guy's look.
I wrote also here that this whole movie has America's Got Talent vibes. Stand on the square. Who are you and why do you want to be in the movies?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then this is when I made the note. I'm like, the more into the movie we go, the more I find this process manipulative and humiliating.
Yeah.
This is when you could tell in my notes, I just started getting like a distaste for this thing. So yeah, then it kind of culminates with the family, which takes up the last 20 to 30 minutes of the film. A man has showed up with 2 of his sons and 2 of his daughters.
Yeah. Those aren't his daughters.
I thought he said at one point.
No, those are his sons, and then the 2 girls are sisters. But their parents are
right, yeah. Their
back
parents
at
are
home.
Someone else. So, but they were standing together for such a long time. Why were they doing their auditions together then?
And they're not even, those girls aren't even actually sisters.
Yeah.
They're pretending to be sisters. They're friends. Mm-hmm. So those 2 girls are friends. And then the guy and the 2 little boys are his sons.
Yeah.
I don't know if you found this in behind the scenes or not. I wouldn't be surprised if the guy is not actually the father of those 2 kids.
Expand on that.
They just like paired people up and they're like, okay, you're with these 2. The scene is you're their dad and you're doing that. You're helping them audition for the film. You 2 are friends. Come on in, blah, blah, blah.
So I'll let you expand on this a bit because I probably don't have too many nice things to say. But the 2 sisters, quote unquote, he spends a lot of time talking about morality. Would you rather be a humane person or a Hollywood? Or would you rather be a humane person or an actor?
Or an artist.
An artist.
But yeah.
He also has this whole thing about how cry on command, if you're able to cry on command, it shows you're a good actor. If you aren't a good actor, you can't cry. If you aren't able to cry on command, it shows I'm a good director because I got you to tear up earlier. But remember, he says that too.
If you can't do it a second time without me prompting you.
So what did you like about all this? Because I didn't like much.
Okay, so just to like paint the scene for people who haven't seen the movie, the 5 of them come up to do this like group audition, right? And he tries to get everybody to cry on command. Eventually, the father and the 2 girls are able to do it. And then he's like, all right, how should I decide which of you I put in the movie? And then one of the girls is like, let's put it to a vote. And obviously everybody votes for themselves. And he's like, see, we can't put it to a vote. And then he basically offers like, okay, do any of you want to step back to give somebody else a chance to be in the movie? And the father ends up being like, you know what? I'll step back to do it. And the girl's like, well, clearly this guy doesn't want it enough. He doesn't deserve to be an actor. And so he sends away the father and his sons. And he's like, okay, so now between you 2, which of you will step away and which of you thinks that they're better than their friend? And neither of them are willing to throw their friend under the bus. So he sends them both away. Then he brings them back. And he's like, well, you see, you weren't willing to do it. Why? He's like, if you stay, whoever stays is an artist. Whoever leaves, you're being more humane. You're showing that you have humanity, but you're not willing to be an actor or an artist. And they both end up staying, and then they both end up leaving together, and he calls them back. And he's like, look, I'm giving you guys a choice. You can throw your friend under the bus, and you get a part in the film. And so he just keeps playing mind games with them over and over, and like pitting friends against each other, pitting the girls against the young boys, pitting the dad against his boys, like doing everything he can to see kind of like what people's limits are and what people are willing to do to get into the movie. And his like thesis there is, what are you willing to do for cinema? Are you willing to screw over your friend? Are you willing to throw your kids under the bus? Are you willing to make a sacrifice for other people so that they can be in cinema? What does all of this mean to you? And it's like 30 minutes of these mind games That's kind of what happens in the scene.
Well, I mean, that's why I started like losing my patience for this entire project. That's when I first wrote I reject the premise. Because in that behind the scenes stuff, it mentions how the invention of cinema is largely contributed to the Lumiere brothers, who first like introduced their the technology that would essentially make motion pictures. And it was 1895. So this project was done in 1995, specifically on the 100-year anniversary of the birth of cinema.
Right.
And the more I saw what was going on, though I find it a fascinating project, it seemed like it wasn't really doing anything in service of cinema, from my perspective. He's using the guise of cinema to manipulate people as test subjects. At one point, she's like getting upset. She goes, "Why are you so strict?" He's like, "It's not me, it's cinema that's so cruel," which I think is a horrendous thing to say about an art form you claim to love. And Makhmalbaf does love film. Make no mistake, he is a lover of cinema. Even more so than Kiarostami, I could argue that Kiarostami was a man who like loved paintings and photography, and cinema was one of his just avenues to explore some of those things. We talked about this in the past, where Kiarostami even mentioned he didn't actually watch that many movies himself.
Yeah, he was a poet.
Yeah, and poetry was one of his main loves. But Makhmalbaf loved cinema specifically. He goes, this whole thing about whether or not you can cry on command, I don't know. I'd love for some actors who are listening to this like weigh in, but like acting is way more than just whether or not you can cry in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Good acting it's about the profound capacity for human empathy, the ability to connect deeply with another person's experience.
And he does admit that at one point in the film. When someone challenges him on it, he's like, "No, you're right, but we have 2,000 people auditioning and trampling over each other outside. We have riots occurring, and I only have 100
By your own design."
Yeah, you're right. But he's like, this is the situation. I need a system where I can ruthlessly keep just 100 people. It's like, if you have a better system, you tell me now.
Yeah, I just didn't see how this was.
I don't agree with it.
My final thoughts on that thing was, this isn't a celebration of cinema, it's a celebration of himself.
Yeah, maybe. It definitely, to me, feels more of, instead of being a retrospective on cinema, it absolutely feels like a retrospective on that entire genre of cinema haqiqat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that is an entire genre in Iran that was extremely popular, and it was the only type of cinema from Iran that got any real international acclaim for like decades.
Yeah. The thing that I say that I can honestly say that is profoundly interesting about this is what it's revealing about how much specifically Western cinema has impacted the lives of some of these rural, poor Iranian people who you think don't have access to those things.
Yeah.
Like one guy claims his favorite actor is Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
Which is like an interesting thing to say in 1995 because, yeah, he was like at the top of popularity at that time. And it's like, oh, that's funny that this guy like is breaking through borders and boundaries to make it to Iran.
Was the question there, who's your favorite actor, or who do people say you look like?
I think it was about favorite actor or people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because one woman says she looks like Marilyn Monroe earlier in that scene, which no, she didn't.
Yeah. That's why I was like, oh, is he saying who people say he reminds him of, or is it his favorite?
Yeah.
In either case, it was a funny answer.
You know what's a really good way to celebrate 100 years of cinema?
How?
Put on a free film festival for people of Iran to go watch movies. That's probably one great way to make it about cinema and not about yourself as a director.
Yeah.
Those are my main reactions. I have some thoughts on behind the scenes trivia, but I'll let you wrap up your thoughts about what else your main reactions were to this film.
I think, more than anything, it just made me excited to dive into the behind the scenes and trivia of the film.
Oh.
For a movie in itself, the thing that was entertaining to me was the meta view on it. It wasn't like, oh, this is a fascinating premise. It was more of what's real and what's not, and playing a game of trying to identify what felt real and contrived or real and scripted. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was the fascinating thing to me. That, and also some of the commentary on this style. And we'll get into it in deeper analysis, because I do think that Makhmalbaf is hyper aware of the ethics of these things. And I think he's actually commenting on it. And I think that that's why he specifically plays the director in this, because I think that he's trying to show that he's self-aware.
Right. Behind the scenes and trivia. You'll probably be happy to know this is considered part of a spiritual trilogy, much like Coker. So the first one would be Once Upon a Time in Cinema, 1991. This film deals with the early filmmakers and the relationship to the courts, like legal courts. So this is like a lot of like, this is like edited collage. What do you call it? It's like almost like documentary made out of footage from previous films. It's like the history of cinema through like clips and scenes and whatever, and Iranian people reacting to them. Tears, joy, dancing, celebrating. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Once Upon a Time in Cinema. It also has another title.
Nasruddin Shah, actor of cinema.
Yeah. The second film is Salam Cinema in 1995. The second, which deals with Iranian fans and their cinephilia. Mm-hmm. And the third is called The Actor, Honar Pishe. Deals principally with actors and their cinematic world. So I haven't seen the other two films in this trilogy, but they were all made back to back, and this was like his exploration in a trilogy of films about the impact of cinema on the Iranian people. So you'll probably want to dive right into those.
Yeah. Maybe we should do them for the podcast, Kaveh.
Yep. Just to do this, because it's the first time I was doing a Mohsen Makhmalbaf film, and for prominent actors, I like to do a little thing, but he was born on May 29th, 1957 to a staunchly religious family. He grew up in southern Tehran and spent his early childhood in the loving care of his maternal grandmother and aunt, while his mother, divorced by Makhmalbaf's father, worked as a nurse. He grew up in the religiously and politically charged atmosphere of the 60s, and the June 1963 uprising of Ayatollah Khomeini is one of his earliest memories. Chiefly responsible for his early politicization was his stepfather, a religiously devout and politically active supporter of Khomeini, whom his mother married soon after Makhmalbaf was born. In 1972, Makhmalbaf formed his own urban guerrilla group. 2 years later, he attacked a police officer with a knife and was arrested and jailed. He remained in jail until 1978 when the revolutionary wave led by Khomeini freed him and he launched his literary and cinematic career. He was heavily criticized for being considered a puppet and supporter of the draconian Islamic regime in Iran, that his views sat too closely to the IR. It wasn't until his second wave of films, which is like The Cyclist and his, these films that came out like in the 90s, that he began to distance himself and even criticize the regime. The real break with Islamist ideology, which seemed to have removed the partition, unifying his creative expressions and presumably his psyche, emerged forcibly with his war movie Marriage of the Blessed, 1988. Released in the year that the war with Iraq had ended. This and two slightly earlier movies, The Peddler and The Cyclist, announced his entry into his socially concerned cinema, quote unquote, or as he called it, the anti-capitalist cinema. So he'd started kind of like, he had these waves where he was like very kind of religious and supported the Islamic regime, then backing away from it and making like films that would attack it, and then returning. So he's had this very complicated relationship with the government, more so than many other filmmakers. Makhmalbaf took time off from directing in 1996 to form the Makhmalbaf Film House, which I'd mentioned during the Samir Makhmalbaf episode. A school for young filmmakers, which was mostly his family. It quickly became a private production house in his own home for the increasing number of filmmakers within his own family. In 1997, his 17-year-old daughter Samir directed The Apple, and he was the screenwriter of that project and editor. Makhmalbaf's wife, Marzieh Meshkini, worked as an assistant director to her daughter and then took up directing herself. This film, Salam Cinema, was made for the celebration, supposedly, of the 100th anniversary of cinema. As I had mentioned earlier, the year 1895 is considered the debut of the motion picture as an entertainment medium. The year 1895 was the year of the first film screenings by Auguste and Louis Lumière.
Lumiere went on to become a candle holder in...
Yeah, there you go. I knew you were going to do that.
Yeah, in Beauty and the Beast.
The film starts with the music of The Dance of Spring by Shahdad Rouhani. Did you know that song that it starts with? I didn't know it.
I don't think so.
I mentioned everything about Gabe and Salam Cinema, which is the actress Shahriar Jawdat.
Is it Gabe or Gabe?
Gabe.
Okay.
An important dimension of love that Salam Cinema in particular brought up was cinephilia, the love of young Iranians for cinema, testified to by their overwhelming response to the film's casting call and by the passion they displayed during the film's auditions. So films like Once Upon a Time in Cinema inscribes the director's own post-Islamist love for cinema as it celebrates through choice film clips and humor some of the best films in history of Iranian cinema, films he would have condemned in his previous incarnation. The film's ending is a joyful bravura ode to cinema's capacity to evoke love and reconciliation. There are many clips from Iranian movies showing people joyously smiling, shaking hands, and hugging one another, all actions prohibited in the cinema of the Islamic Republic. Tricky legacies. Farhan, tricky legacies. That's it for behind the scenes and trivia.
So you don't know too much about, like, of the scenes in the movies, which of them were real, which were not, which were, like, aside from that, the premise, the general premise of the woman who's like, hey, I don't want to be in the movie. I'm just trying to use the film to get a visa. Aside from that, You weren't able to dig up much?
It's funny how little he's talked about this specific film. I even have a book of interviews, and I read through it looking for any reference to this film, and he only mentioned it in passing. It seems like, I mean...
Is that your history of Iranian cinema?
That wasn't even that one. It's called Close Up, the Past, Present, and Future of Iranian Cinema. But yeah, in that, he doesn't... I assume that a large part of what you see is like, it wasn't scripted. It was largely all real footage, like a documentary, and he was directing them off camera as well. So it's like real footage, but with direction.
It's assumed that the general setups of the scenes are like scripted and that people are told like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And then they go in and then it's improv. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of tell when the scenes start that like the people in the auditions are starting off kind of acting like they're auditioning. But then as Makhmalbaf gives them prompts, you see them break character and you see on their face and in their performance, all of a sudden they're switching between like, oh, wait, is that actually Makhmalbaf telling me this? Or is that the character that Makhmalbaf is playing telling me this?
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think with the two sisters at the end, especially the one with the glasses, I'm able to tell more when she turns it on and off. Like when it's really her and when she's playing a part. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that?
I could see that.
Because when she's playing a part, it's much more melodramatic.
Oh, like when she starts laughing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, you're like 100% acting here. Like that's not actually you.
Yeah. And yeah. Okay, critical reactions.
What'd you find?
It was screened in Un Certain Regard section of the 1995 Cannes Film Festival. So there you go. We got it. It was the winner of the best doc at the Munich Documentary Film Festival in 1996.
Nice.
Deeper analysis. Go ahead. You take it away.
Okay. So there's two scenes in the movie that make me pretty convinced that Makhmalbaf is actually critiquing this style of filmmaking. The first one is, there's that scene we talked about with the guy who looks kind of brutish. Mm-hmm. And Makhmalbaf asks him, what kind of roles do you usually play? And he's like, usually I play the bad guy. And he's like, but what do you want to play? Do you want to play a good guy? He's like, well, that's up to the director. He's like, well, what kind of person are you? He's like, well, I think I'm a good guy. I think I'm a good person. Like, I'm generally pretty kind and sweet. And he's like, okay, so what do you want to play? He's like, that's up to the director. He's like, look, I'm asking you, if you chose, are you playing a good guy or a bad guy? And he's like, I think I would rather play the bad guy. And then he laughs and Makhmalbaf laughs. And then he's like, what about me? If you were to cast me in a movie, would you cast me as a good guy or a bad guy? Mm-hmm. He's like, just look at me and tell me what you think I should play. And the guy says, I'd cast you as a bad guy. And Makhmalbaf starts laughing.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, there's, again, if you take that meta step back, right? Mm-hmm. Two things have now happened with both of these characters. That guy, the brute, who usually plays a bad guy, is now playing a good guy in this very movie that we're watching.
Why?
He's sweet. He's funny. He has a warm smile. He's like very genuine and sincere. You know what I mean? Now he's playing this guy who always plays a bad guy. He's playing a good guy in this movie. Mm-hmm. Now, Makhmalbaf, from this point, especially from this point to the end of the movie, he's playing a bad guy.
Yeah.
He's coming off as mean and exploitative and cruel. And he even calls himself cruel. Mm-hmm. First, he says cinema's cruel, right? But then later, this is the second point that I was going to make, but I'll come back to it. But that's why, to me, it's like this guy saying, I would cast you as a bad guy. Makhmalbaf is now playing the bad guy. Mm-hmm. So, and that's really the tipping point where it's like, okay, you're taking things way too far. So then you have the scene with him and the two girls, and they're like, why are you being so cruel? And he's like, I'm not cruel. It's cinema that's cruel, right? Mm-hmm. Then after he casts the girls, he's like, okay, the two of you are in the movie, these like 15, 16-year-old girls. He's like, the two of you are now in the movie. Now I want you two to sit at this table and I want you two to cast people. And they immediately start berating all the other women who come in and out, right?
Yeah.
And then Makhmalbaf comes over to them and he's like, no, you know what? Go join them in the audition. And then he starts doing it back to them again. And he comments on it and he says, you mentioned that you felt I was being cruel. And how quickly did you become cruel when you were in this seat? And they're like, I know it was like an automatic reflex.
Yeah.
It like got to my head, all this stuff. So I think, again, Makhmalbaf is hyper aware of that. And I think he's aware of the power that a director can hold and how a director can easily become cruel and exploitative. I don't think that it's meant to be glorifying that style of filmmaking. I think it's meant to be a critique of it.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't even think it's necessarily glorifying, even if I don't agree necessarily that he's critiquing it. I just think that, I just don't like, I think for such an interesting experiment, I didn't really get what it all culminates to.
Right.
Like, what is it all about? What does it mean? What have I learned?
I genuinely think that it's about showing the extents to which people will go to express their love of cinema, even if it's immoral and unethical, like what they're doing. And I think it's also a critique on this style of filmmaking. That's my takeaway. Also, it made me hyper aware of how blind so many Westerners are when they watch these Makhmalbaf and Kiarostami movies and praise them for being exploitative in their directing style. Because there's enough people out there, especially from Europe and Canada and the US, who watch these films and they're like, wow, it's so novel, it's so niche. I want to do that. I want to do this thing, whatever. And it's like, well, no, why can't you look at this and elevate yourself beyond this? Which I think is the difference for me between the way that Panahi does it, for example, and the way that Kiarostami does it. Where Panahi will still definitely blur some lines, but I think generally speaking, he's not as exploitative.
No, he's not.
Or even like Ali Abbasi with the scenes that he did in Holy Spider, where he told one actor one thing and the other one something else. Like the things that he was telling them, it was like a little manipulative of the scenario. It wasn't like damaging to the psyche of those human beings.
Right, yeah.
And so that whole commentary on why do you have to choose between being humane and being an artist?
Yeah.
Those things are not mutually exclusive. How dare you? Right? Is, I think, kind of the whole crux of things, is kind of the whole point. Like in the setup of the film, people die in the riot.
They died?
As it seems like it. He mentions, he's like, it was so bad that like people died or people are dying. Like it's like kind of left.
More like people are dying to get in here.
Well, he's talking specifically about how they were trampled. People are dying to get in here. It's never confirmed like what the body count is or like, but you see people get trampled in the riot. These are all the reasons why I think that this film is actually more of a critique than it is a celebration of that style of filmmaking.
Okay, that's deeper analysis from Farn. I mentioned my sort of deeper analysis was just the idea that it's an interesting reflection point on how cinema has impacted the lives of Iranian people who are the government at the time is keeping them censored and keeping them sort of like cut off from a lot of Western influence, and yet they're still having access to these people. I thought it was really interesting. And it's not much of a deeper analysis, but I just thought like the most fascinating areas of this film was kind of revealing the cinephilia of Iranian citizens. Best scene. I like Zainal Zadeh. Zainal, say his name again?
Zainal Zadeh.
Yeah, that was my favorite scene. I thought it was great acting.
Yeah.
And then I was also like, had the rug thrown out from under me when Makhmalbaf says he isn't good enough.
Yeah, that was a good scene.
Yeah. Your favorite scene?
For me, it's the scene with the guy who's pretending to be blind. I thought it really just set the scene for the rest of the movie, and his performance was incredible.
Yeah. Damn, that's poetry. My favorite part was when he was talking about, he keeps pressing the two sisters to say, do you want to be a humane person or do you want to work in the movies? And he keeps asking him back and back. If you had to choose one, which one would you choose? Choose now. And she turns back to him and says,
شما خودتون اگه بهتون بگن این شغل کنار بذارید انسان باشید شما خودتون چه کار میکنید؟
What about you? If you were told to give up cinema to be a humane person, what would you do? And he thinks about it for quite a few minutes, but doesn't answer the question. He switches the subject.
Yeah, he never answers.
But I really like the fact that she threw it back at him, because I feel like that was probably an unscripted moment.
Yeah.
And I kind of find it very cheeky of him to have just not answered his own question. Like all of a sudden the more questions of morality is being posed upon him and he doesn't want to answer.
Yeah. And she ends up throwing back at him immediately after too. She says,
هنرمندی که انسان نباشه اصلا هنرمند نیست.
You know what? An inhumane artist is no true artist.
Okay.
My favorite quote is, again, it's going back to that scene with the guy who's pretending to be blind. Makhmalbaf asks him, why do you love cinema?
تو سینما مثلا یه بازی احساسی وجود داره. اونو میتونم بفهمم.
And he says, in cinema, there is an essence, a feeling that exists, and that I can comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
Damn, that's poetry.
Yeah. Favorite performance?
The fake blind guy. Like, again.
Yeah.
Like, that guy, like, that scene is so good. I love that scene.
I'll give it back to my guy. What's his name?
Zainalzadeh, yeah.
His full name is Moharram Zainalzadeh.
Hang on, let me pull up the name of the...
I found it. Saeed Kur Agha.
That's the guy that I like?
Yeah, Kur Agha.
No, it's not. You made that up.
Saeed blind guy.
I actually can't find it. It doesn't say.
Yeah, I know. The IMDb's a disaster.
Yeah. Well, guy who played the guy playing a blind guy, if you're listening to the podcast, you were my favorite performer in the movie.
Yeah, for all you audio listeners.
Yeah.
Festival of Cons.
Take it away, Kaveh.
I gesture towards everything I've previously said in this podcast.
I'm genuinely surprised. I thought you were trolling me when you got on the call.
I know. I had all these plans about coming up with a lie too and like tricking you and then being like, that's the art of cinema. And then I just disliked this movie so much. It was like, meh.
I mean, you might do it in your wrap up at the end, be like, got it.
Got it.
A plus plus.
And that is acting.
And that is cinema.
Yeah. This is pod racing.
Yeah.
What about you, Festival of Cons? Did you find anything you didn't like? Oh my God, Farhad.
Honestly?
Oh my God. You're ridiculous.
Not really.
You're ridiculous.
Not really. Like the whole thing just felt like, again, to me, it felt like commentary on that genre of cinema haqiqat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and there were critiques that I had of this style of filmmaking. So I didn't think it didn't feel to me as though it was perpetuating the style. It felt more like it was intentionally critiquing it.
Yeah.
I guess if I was to pick something to criticize, it would be that this is less of a celebration of 100 years of cinema and more of a reflective look on that one specific subgenre of the Iranian New Wave movement.
Yeah. Double feature lineup.
Kaveh?
I got a couple. The obvious one could be Close Up, but I don't want to go into too much detail as to why until we do that episode. I could also see you asking me why I love Close Up as much as I do and dislike this film. And I don't know why, but I also can't go into it until we get to that episode.
Okay.
There's also a short documentary by Kiarostami called Homework. It's on his Coker trilogy. It's on the Blu-ray and DVD, where he interviewed a bunch of students one by one, asking them about like the academic system and why they study. And I feel like this very much felt like this. It actually is very similar, but instead of about acting, it's about the academic system. It's like very much like one by one, him sitting there with students.
Yeah, you're right.
So you compare it with that, or you compare it up with any of the films that are the spiritual trilogy of this. What did we talk about? Once Upon a Time in Cinema.
But you haven't seen them.
No, I know, but
I feel like all of these are cop-out answers. One you said, I don't officially want to pair it with. One of them is not a feature. And then the third one isn't even something you've seen.
No, but how could you know? How could you deny that these would be like good pairings?
With what? With the trilogy?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Neither of us have seen the other films.
Yeah. Okay, Batman Begins. Go, yours.
I think I would likely pair this up with Where's the Friend's House? Because I think it would be fascinating to watch Where's the Friend's House, talk about the behind the scenes of how he got the performances that he did out of people, and then watch this and be like, okay, here's that style of filmmaking in play.
He didn't direct Where's the Friend's House.
I know, I understand. It's the same philosophy of filmmaking.
Yeah.
And it's a commentary on that genre of film.
So you could call that night an evening with monstrous male film directors, toxic masculinity, and all it's chalked up to be.
Yeah.
Can this be a modern Hollywood remake?
Yeah. But I would want it to comment on like the toxic tendencies in American cinema.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's a film, I kept thinking about Christopher Guest, who's a very, very funny film director and writer. He's done films like Best in Show and Spinal Tap, but he has a film called Waiting for Guffman, which is about a small production playhouse that's auditioning for a small theater show. It reminded me of that, and I feel like if Christopher Guest was to do an American remake of this, it'd be really funny and interesting.
I'd love if it commented on like someone like David O. Russell.
Yeah, I thought about him too for some reason. What would his version of this be?
Yeah.
Commenting on himself.
Yeah. or someone commenting on David O. Russell. But yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, final thoughts and grades. I'll go first. I guess in conversation with you, I bump up my grade a whole letter.
Whoa.
So I give it a C plus.
Okay, we're not too far off from each other. I thought we were going to be way far away from each other.
Really? Because I thought you were going to give it something like an A plus based on how you've...
No. I'm giving... Because I still think that it does lack a little bit of substance.
Mm-hmm.
There's like no arc. There's no real story. The whole thing is basically just like a reflective of this one specific subgenre of Iranian cinema. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does that very well, but I think there's just not enough meat on the bone for this to grow beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I'm giving the film probably a B++.
Okay.
I was teetering around an A minus. It's like a difference of a percent of a point out of 100. But I think just thinking back on it and realizing that, like, you know what? Story-wise, there isn't much progression here that happens. I think I'm giving it a B++. What would have bumped it up for me is if intercut throughout the film, we're seeing what Makhmalbaf is getting up to, or what one of these people in the audition, or what like Zain Al-Zadeh, or like frame the movie around one of the people in the film and show us what he's doing outside the film. Similar to like in Through the Olive Trees.
Mm-hmm.
How we're seeing what's going on with the life of the one actor who's chasing his love interest as like a kind of framework to the film. I think that is missing in this movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, B++, which means that our average Cinema Rex score for this film...
You make an interesting point. Like this idea of if it had attached itself to even any one character and made it a little bit more of an intimate human exploration, still keeping all of its trimmings. Like this film is short. It's 70 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
It could have done with like 20 minutes added and like you focus on this woman who's trying to get into... Yeah, you know, like...
Or Zain Al-Zadeh, like what's going on in his life, you know?
I think like really good documentaries need like this anchor point for you to attach your emotion to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know who I'm supposed to care about in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Is it...
And that could have been a more scripted point, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but you could do that in documentaries too. When you're documenting something, you could discover a character that's interesting to you and be like, now let's follow them a bit.
Yeah.
It doesn't even need to be scripted.
Yeah.
And you get this gift of this woman who wants to seek refuge from Iran via starring in the film, which is such an interesting moment. And they're like, well, but let's go back to Makhmalbaf being a tyrant.
So our official grade for Cinema Rex for this film is a B-.
Mm-hmm. How does cinema affect the lives of ordinary individuals? Salam Cinema seeks to explore this question, presenting itself as an exercise in measuring the impact of cinema on human beings. In this reviewer's opinion, however, it does not pursue this inquiry in good faith. But from a more neutral perspective, Salam Cinema can instead be viewed as a celebration of cinema itself. In this cinema verite film, or cinema
Hakikat,
director Mohsen Makhmalbaf effectively dissolves the boundaries between documentary and traditional narrative cinema. Whether the gradual transformation of Makhmalbaf from a filmmaker into an almost authoritarian figure in the orchestration of performance is intentional remains unclear. However, it is evident that the film resists hand-holding to its credit, and instead invites the audience to interpret its layers independently. Makhmalbaf appears content with leaving much of the interpretive work to the viewer, perhaps even relishing their varied conclusions. The film's use of cinema to reflect upon cinema itself is undeniably compelling, particularly as it showcases the pervasive influence of Hollywood on the lives of Iranian citizens. Within the film, nearly every participant expresses a deep love for cinema, perceiving it as a pathway to prosperity or even an avenue for escape. The theme of escapism underscores the power of cinema, its ability to offer a means of getting away from reality. For the men and women of 1980s Iran, such an escape would have held profound significance, adding a poignant layer to Salam Cinema's exploration of cinema's role in society. Farhan, thank you so much for doing the podcast.
Kaveh, thank you.
You know how I feel about you.
Unfortunately.
To all our listeners, thank you for listening. Farhan, do the thing about the socials.
Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends and family. 5 stars, 5-star rating.
To all of our listeners, be umid didar.
Bye. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.